You're very welcome to the polling station with Johnny Ward and William Kajani. And this is a fascinating week for Donald Trump and US politics, in the sense that there is a very, very strong chance, albeit an odds against chance at the moment, that he will become the first president ever in the US to be impeached twice. Now, it hasn't been a great week for the big man. Obviously, he was knocked off Twitter and Facebook. He's had to deal with massive anger, not only from Democrats, but within his own party. And this is the key thing, William Kajani, in that for this impeachment to be realized, some Republicans are definitely going to join the Democrats in voting to impeach him, but it's a question of how many. And Star Sports has a market on this, possibly the first to go with it, and I would have to check that. But how do you price this up? Because it's obviously entirely dependent on how many Republicans could vote against their former leader.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've literally, at the moment of speaking, just gone up with it. There's one article of impeachment against President Trump, or President Trump for a few more days at least, and it is incitement of insurrection. We make it a 4-11 shot that he is not convicted of that. We make it 2-1 that he is. A reminder, by the way, that our baseline for a successful conviction is the same as the US Senate. 67 out of 100 US senators have to vote for that. Now, there are 50 senators who caucus with the Republicans. We would presume, with the Democrats, we would presume that they would vote to impeach the president. The Republicans have the same, which is why Democrats have control, because Kamala Harris breaks ties. So you'd start at 50-50. You need 17 Republican senators. Now, 3 of them have already given some sort of support to the idea of impeachment. Mitt Romney of Utah, then you have Ben Sasse of Nebraska, and Patrick Toomey of Pennsylvania. So that's 3. Others are considering it. I know that for a fact, and I think we can presume others are considering it. There are various reasons sort of for or against voting to impeach Trump. One would be the possibility of completely kicking him out of politics forever if you are convicted. In the Senate, you can't run again. And at this point in time, Trump is no bigger than 10-1 with Starr for 2024. There's also, again, I just think the sort of revulsion of what happened inside the Capitol, which actually directly affected many of those Republican senators. There are about 9 senators who have said that they won't vote to impeach Trump, Republican senators. They include sort of familiar names, your Marco Rubio's, your Ted Cruz's, or whatever. But there are a growing number of Republican senators who have come back to news organizations with some sort of response when they're asked a question, but who haven't gone one way or the other. That's 9 at the moment. I think it's fair to say we can presume they're seriously considering impeachment, and there are plenty of others who haven't responded. I mean, I'd think it'd be tight. It is my original thinking, just purely because Biden will be inaugurated in very few days from now, but also what Trump did and what happened there was sort of so extraordinary, it seems to jump across all these traditional political boundaries.
Well, what's interesting for me is that I think as it was all happening in Capitol Hill, Donald Trump Jr. was heard to say it's not the Republican Party, it's Donald Trump's Republican Party. So if this were a vote from the Republicans, in the sense that they got the third of the 50 or so that they need, could they see this as the potential to break away from Trumpism and reestablish the Republican Party at a time of what is in some respects crisis for it, by basically going against Trump and effectively disowning him by impeaching him?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a big political split whichever way you look at it, because Trump still has an approval rating of 70% with Republicans. To only lose 10 points amongst them after the events last week is extraordinary. But once again, Trumpism really has taken over the GOP's voter base. And it would be very difficult, I think, for a lot of senators to break with that, given that most people who voted for them would be Trump supporters, and there's no doubt about that. Longer term, it's very tricky, I think, as a balancing act, if you're looking at it in purely a political way, for senators to say, we're going to vote so that Trump can never run again. And not just that, but you have to consider what his family will do. Donald Trump Jr. Has been polled in many a hypothetical presidential race, and he's done reasonably well too. Ivanka Trump has designs on running for office. I'm not saying that they are super serious contenders at the moment, nor that they should be entirely dismissed, but that's an interesting dynamic. Does the Trump support go to Don Jr., thus making him the hypothetical frontrunner, or can GOP senators take it? And if so, does a GOP senator who has an eye for 2024 and running for that nomination decide to stick with Trump on that basis, whilst also getting furious pushback, basically, from what would appear to be a majority of voters in the country who believe that those events were unacceptable?
Yeah, and it seemed that Mike Pence, as of last week, was one of those persons who thought that it was unacceptable. Now, by all accounts, he's had a chat with Trump, I think, yesterday, and it seemed to go reasonably well. And there was an onus on Pence in terms of what he might do. And this brings me along to our next bit of betting, which is Donald Trump to be removed from office before the 20th of January. 25's on, he don't. 17-2, he does. Now, is there any scope for the 17-2 there that something might happen in the next week?
Slight scope, but it's difficult, not only politically but logistically. Trump is entitled to a defense in his impeachment trial. You could get one set up before Inauguration Day, but that would require moving business around in the Senate. I'm not sure also how much appetite there really is to do something that quickly. If Mike Pence was to become the president pro tempore, then he would do so for only a day before Biden's inauguration. We're getting very close, I think, at the point where your biggest fear, frankly, is making sure state houses, etc., are safe and not actually some sort of total coup, which appears to have been beaten down by various institutions in the US. So I would think tiny bit of scope, but I would not be backing Trump to go before the 20th. I think there will be a direct transition.
In terms of his year ahead, he does seem to be quite delusional, and hasn't really apologized at all. Actually, he was speaking I think yesterday for the first time since obviously he's been taken off social media, but an awful lot of I think a lot of people, even I got an email from the Irish Times this morning in terms of their they send an email every morning to subscribers, kind of, I guess, going through the political digest of the day and so forth. And if it were a mask, the mask was certainly let slip at the bottom of the email, where the guy who wrote the email basically said, Trump might get impeached. It's not all bad news. So there's visceral hatred towards him from like journalists who should be non-partisan. And there's a lot of anger among people who want to see this man punished. What is the year ahead going to hold for him?
So first things first, I imagine that Trump personally may try and stay relevant for a period of time. I think he's going to have a lot of old school scores to settle. How he'll go about doing that, I don't really know. He's been put off most social media channels apart from Gab, which is still going, and is mainly sort of a haven, I think it's fair enough to say, for the alt-right. Parler, of course, was taken down because Amazon Web Hosting refused to have them. I can see him trying to have the same relevancy that he did without the office of the presidency, but failing to do so. I can expect more cable news appearances. If Fox won't have him, I think One American News Network and Newsmax are the sort of places that you'll see him being around there. And I don't really know what he's going to do in terms of politics. I don't know whether he is going to try and interfere with internal GOP affairs, or whether he's going to back his son, Don Jr., or Ivanka, his daughter. It's all very up in the air. One thing people keep saying is that he could start his own TV network, but given his past record on starting anything, I just don't see that working long term. I just don't. We've been here so many times since like the 80s. We've been here. Trump buys an airline or gets a brand of steak or water or a university, and within 6 months the whole thing is on flames and there's lawsuits as far as the eye can see. So I think it's going to be a lot of him trying to sort of find what he thinks makes him relevant. And I think a big part of US political discourse is going to be decided upon how much attention he gets. Is he the sort of person who can still call into Fox and Friends and rant for an hour, or is he somebody who's reduced to the sidelines, sort of just chuntering away in front of border walls and playing golf the weekends or whatever?
Yeah, we've a few Q's and A's as well that we're going to get to. But before that, interesting time on the political front for Star Sports. Lots of markets coming up in terms of European politics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll be looking at the next polling station to have a price on the next German Chancellor or CDU leader. Angela Merkel is actually stepping down, and what an ending of an era that is. We're also looking at what's going on in Italy, the government there potentially close to collapse. We're getting closer in the European election cycle to a couple of significant events. There is a French presidential election, which is not too far away. So that's all stuff you can expect to see on the polling station in the coming weeks and months, with some guests as well. Another thing also, domestic markets will be looking at some domestic stuff. Local elections, obviously, is a big one, including whether it will take place in the date at all. So watch this space for that.
This is an interesting one in terms of your questions from Stu D. Now, there was actually a poll conducted in Ireland last year. I think it was around October, November. How many of you would vote for Donald Trump? What do you think the one in how many said they would vote for Donald Trump?
I'd estimate 1 in 10.
1 in 8. So you're pretty close. But the number was actually relatively higher for people sort of aged in the sort of mid-30s, mid-20s, 30s bracket. Hopefully things might have changed from last week. But Stu D says, if the election was rerun this week, what percentage of the vote would Trump get? And related, has the events of the last week finished off the Trump family in mainstream politics, or will they or close supporters still be a factor in 2024? And I mean, it's ridiculous that Stu is even asking this question when, to my mind, Trumpism and the whole political operation around it should be obsolete now. But that's not going to be the case, I would have thought.
Absolutely not. No, Trumpism will either have different ambassadors or will keep on going. Whether it has the same people, I don't know. It's a great question. In terms of voting,
is Trumpism effectively neo-fascism, or what is it?
I would say it's a sort of populism on steroids, which main effect is essentially disinformation and political noise, in the sense that a key part of Trumpism has just been always attacking your opponents, always bending the truth. If you need to, just saturating spaces with discourse and or disinformation, as Trump was very intent on doing, and also a lot of attention seeking. There wasn't a lot of what you would call sort of intense political strategy or policy there. Much of the Trump stuff was basically, this is what we want to do, and we're going to do it and raise hell. And not a lot of that, I think, translated into long-term policy, although there were a lot of short-term things that Trump actually did change, for the best or the worse. Historians will discuss. Regarding that question on how much the vote Trump would have gotten, I think he probably would drop no more than say 3 to 5 percentage points, which I know probably is the difference between this comprehensive victory and a landslide. But the Trump base, I imagine, still would have voted for him, and I think they'd have done that in the numbers relatively similar to the November election. I don't know if he'd get sort of 74 million votes. I don't know if he'd get that. But I don't think it would have hugely changed the outcome of the election, because that support is so baked in. And these people have seen 4 years of Trump and Trumpism and decided he's their man anyway.
Couldn't agree more. Adam Beasley, early grumblings among new Conservative backbenchers about the ability of Boris. Sebastian Payne has reported some letters that have gone to Graham Brady. I think this could affect the market of Boris making it to the next election. We've actually spoken about this, Boris potentially getting an early exit, but obviously something that Adam is zoning in on as well.
Yeah, it's interesting to note every single time we have a vote on more punitive restrictions that this comes up, primarily because I think there are a lot of Conservative MPs who, to be fair, like the rest of the population, are getting tired of the knock-on effects of coronavirus restrictions, especially those who haven't seen anything in terms of progress on levelling up or whatever. I think there are MPs who don't have limitless patience, and there will be some noisy backbenchers, but I don't think there's anything as of yet for Johnson to worry about. I think that's more something to look at in the spring, depending on if we've hit our vaccination targets, depending on if we are coming out of the measures now. I would not be coy about any of that happening at the pace that the government says it will, primarily because there are lots of things that need to go right. But I think for now, the amount of letters waiting in sort of these boxes to go to Graham Brady is on the low side. If you had a situation where you couldn't get kids into schools by like April, and you went into tiers and everybody was still tier 4, then maybe some people would begin to lose their patience. But at the moment, grumblings, but no more, I think.
This one is from Double D Jeremy. Give us odds on the giant baby truthers being right.
Well, this is the sort of thing that only really can happen with, and again, I'm not making any comment on behalf of Star here, but right, this is the sort of thing that can only happen with an absence of information. So I actually tried to run through this in my head and gave myself a bit of a brainworm. And it's probably about 10 to 1 that the giant baby truthers are right, if you ask me to price it up seriously. Not that I think we'll be laying a bet on that anytime soon.
Will Tucker, this year's May local elections are doubtful again thanks to lockdown, frustrating campaigning, more likely to be postponed to summer, autumn, or 2022.
If you were to push them back, I think autumn probably would look the wiser choice. I think if you're stretching it out to 2021 or 2022, that's the entire year or two you've added onto terms which are already delayed and extended. The government seems set on May as the date. That should be potentially quite feasible. I mean, we're in a bad situation now in terms of public health, but it's January. This is I think it's the 13th or 12th, 13th of January. We're doing this. I would say probably to be safe, moving it into the middle of summer would seem a wise suggestion to me, and spreading the vote out over 2 to 3 days so that you could have a high turnout, but without people needing to queue up behind each other. But I think you'd make May the favourite now. It's something we'll look into, definitely, particularly as I think Scotland has said something about wanting to extend the days of voting, but for now I think May's most likely.
And finally, which you've kind of answered already, but if Mitch actually starts pushing for impeachment to get Trump out of the GOP, do we see a Trump stand next time, or does it depend on any of them being out of jail? And that's from David Eason.
Yeah, indeed. Friend of the show, David Eason. Very good question there. The only person I really see being in sort of the eye of the storm as far as charges go is actually Donald Trump himself. I don't see it happening to Donald Jr. I certainly don't see it happening to Ivanka. There's been no sort of background to suggest that. Can I see a Trump running in 2024? Yeah, absolutely. They probably have a better chance than most senators would. They would need to do a hell of a PR job, particularly as Don Jr. is so inherently linked to what Donald's been doing over the past few weeks. Ivanka is less so, although she deleted the tweets about American patriots at the Capitol.
Indeed.
I think it's easier probably to rehab Ivanka and go for something in 2024. But that depends on a whole load of factors, including just the general health of the GOP. So I think Donna's the only person who's got to worry about this. I can see a Trump standing in 2024 for sure. I think they would be less value now than they were it was December, when I was quite keen on backing a Trump or two for 2024. But I think those reputations are a bit more tarnished now.
William, thanks for all of that.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the questions, and thank you for watching.
Yeah, that was the polling station. And where will we be next week? Where will Donald Trump be next week? I'm a bit like that Irish Times reporter. I'm kind of hoping it goes one way. Thanks for listening.
Cheers.